Morning, everybody. Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Morning, everyone. Thanks so much. I know everyone's keen to start talking and networking already, so that's a good start. So thank you, everybody, for coming along. It's our third HydrometAFRICA here. We always appreciate attendance. There's some new faces here. There's a lot of very familiar faces, good friends. So we thank you, everyone, for coming. But I'm actually not going to be doing the opening here today. Our good friend Oupa Segalwe, the manager for comms, stakeholder relations at SOARS, is going to be doing a small opening for us here. So I'll hand straight over. But thank you, everybody, for coming. And over to you, Oupa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke. It's wonderful once again to meet you in person after a couple of years of exchanging WhatsApp texts and emails. Let me first greet the Mauritian management and officials here. The WMO representative, Mr. Dechlan Shilenja, heads of international and regional organizations represented here, representatives of development partners, permanent representatives of the African continent with the WMO, esteemed stakeholders of the African continent, distinguished meteorological and hydrological experts present, officials of national government departments and institutions, treasured colleagues from the South African Weather Service, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I stand here in shoes twice my size to represent the Chief Executive of the South African Weather Service, who is also the country's permanent representative with the WMO, Mr. Isham Abada, who is saddened that he could not join you today and this week due to other commitments. He, however, sends his warmest regards. It is an honor and privilege for us as the South African Weather Service to welcome you all to this HydrometAFRICA Symposium. As you may be aware, the symposium is aimed at bringing together leaders in the meteorology, hydrology, and the like to tackle pressing matters and consider the latest developments in these fields. It marks an opportunity to also develop strategies for better implementation of the latest programs and initiatives by continental, national, meteorological and hydrological services, which we call NMHSs. Government departments, private and public sectors, academic and research institutions that play a role in the meteorological and hydrological value chain for continental development. From a meteorological perspective, we have noted the side event that is scheduled for the 18th of July this year. We are informed that this event, which will coincide with the International Nelson Mandela Day, will focus on artificial intelligence and its applications. In this regard, it is appropriate to state that the WMO has proactively developed a strategic roadmap to integrate AI into the modernization of weather integrated processing and prediction system, and enhanced public and private engagement. Of course, this happened quite recently during the 79th WMO Executive Council session, which took place in June. The session endorsed the WMO AI initiative for approval at the upcoming Extraordinary Congress, which will take place in October. It is envisaged that this giant step will improve forecast accuracy, enable faster decision-making support, and enhance user-oriented service delivery, thus improving the overall service delivery of NMHSs and their relevance, especially in the times of climate change. Moreover, this symposium serves as a good platform to enhance continental resilience from impacts of climate change and climate variability. The key thematic areas of the symposium, as you would know, include, among other things, the establishment of frameworks for early warning systems, public-private partnerships, and cost recovery models. The aforementioned programs are very relevant for the implementation by NMHSs across the globe. You may recall that the Southern African Development Community Secretariat, or the SADC Secretariat, convened a workshop for SADC stakeholders, including NMHSs, in February this year. This was, of course, to heed the clarion call of the SADC Committee of Ministers responsible for meteorology in their August 2024 sitting for the SADC Secretariat to convene a workshop whose primary objectives included the harmonization and better coordination of the early warning system in the SADC region, and to ensure that there are instruments, frameworks, and guidelines to place, or rather in place, to guide its implementation. It also suffices to state that the WMO has made remarkable strides in the development of the public-private partnership framework to guide the related partnerships within the WMO echelons. To this end, a colleague from the South African Weather Service, in collaboration with the representative of French-based global lightning detection specialist Meteorological, will be showcasing the successful journey that the South African Weather Service and Meteorological have embarked upon in the implementation of the public-private partnership model. Furthermore, colleagues, with regard to the cost recovery models, the WMO has succeeded in establishing the aviation and marine cost recovery models for implementation by its members through their respective NMHSs. And in relation to the above, the NMHSs on the African continent have embraced and continue to implement the aviation cost recovery model. Of course, this is conducted through the WMO member-to-member support program, voluntary cooperation program, and other WMO programs that are in place to assist members in their implementation of these very crucial programs. However, there is still a need to put more effort into the development of a marine cost recovery model that will suit continental needs. Having stated this, we believe that all NMHSs represented here, such as the South African Weather Service, are willing and open to learn other strategies and implementation tools from organizations outside of the meteorological field. Ladies and gentlemen, we suspect that you will agree with our observation that this platform is helpful in that it brings together continental meteorological and hydrological stakeholders for enhanced collaboration and cooperation. It therefore becomes imperative that during the upcoming deliberations, we consider the existing regulations and frameworks that will govern the implementation process of our respective institutions to ensure proper alignment and harmony of our efforts. We are confident that this symposium will yield outcomes that will contribute to the laying of the foundation for the concerted global and continental efforts that are aimed at promoting complementarity and collaboration among all stakeholders, protecting the most vulnerable communities of our continent as effectively and efficiently as possible. As I draw towards conclusion, colleagues, kindly allow me to take this opportunity to extend a word of appreciation to the Virasian team and their valued funders for the continued convening of this symposium in order to keep the continental NMHSs and other significant meteorological and hydrological stakeholders abreast of developments that could benefit them in building capacities for enhanced service delivery. In addition, we wish to express a sincere word of gratitude to all stakeholders that are represented here for their selfless and tireless efforts in coordinating and ensuring that key global meteorological and hydrological programs and initiatives are implemented on the continent. Furthermore, we wish to thank the scientific cadre that has availed itself to provide invaluable contributions and strategic insights towards the success of this symposium. Finally, colleagues, to those that come from abroad, we wish to thank you for visiting our country, having left your beautiful countries and comfortable homes to undertake the journey to be with us here. You are warmly welcomed to our country, and the South African Weather Service wishes you fruitful deliberations and engagements as we set off on a path towards the realization of the objectives of this symposium. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, that's great. Really appreciate your kind words there. We're going to go straight into the first panel here. So, Roelof, I'll hand straight over to you here, but thanks again. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Yeah, my name is not Neil Bracken, but my name is Roelof Bruintjes. I am a chief scientist at the Advanced Radar Company, but also a scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. And then also I work together with Arcazania, a subsidiary from Oupa here in South Africa. And we are also doing a project with the with SOURCE in terms of upgrading the software. I'd like to invite my other panel members, Aderito Aramuge from Mozambique, Dechlan Pillay, Senior Manager, National Disaster Management Center from South Africa, and then Jeremy Naidoo, Production Scientist at the Department of Water and Sanitation in South Africa, Bono Nemukula, Deputy Director of Environmental Health. I met with some of you before, some of you are new, and then the last one, Dr. Prithiviraj, Booneeady from Mauritius. Thank you. And I may just sit down also, I'm not going to stand up all the time, so I fall over. So, structural infrastructure and things are important. If we go back to the 4 pillars of early warning systems, knowing the risk analysis, then you get the observations and forecasting, then the combinations and data dissemination, and then basically the response at the local level. And one of the things that we find in many countries in the world is many of these things are stovepipe. Even or stovepipe, but in different agencies, different government agencies. For instance, in South Africa, from what I know, the Weather Service does all the meteorological things. Then you have the Department of Water Affairs or Water and Sanitation. that does all the hydrology. The databases are oftentimes in different places. The Department of Health have a different database in terms of effects of environment on sicknesses and so on. So in that sense, in many countries, we have individual agreements between these agencies to work together. As technology is developing, we also see a confluence of these things. Atmospheric models are coupled with hydrology models. Atmospheric models are coupled with health models. Atmospheric models are coupled with renewable energy forecasting. Atmospheric models are coupled with ocean models. So having all the data for assimilation into our forecasting and improving those forecasting needs multi-institutional efforts. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is clouds do not know borders, neither does tropical cyclones. So this becomes then a regional aspect. How do we work together in terms of and how do we put frameworks in place to have agreements so we can do the best we can in terms of warning the population. We have basically 5 topics here that I want to go through with the panel. Our panel is comprised of 3 people from South Africa, 1 from Mozambique, and 1 from the island nation of Mauritius. So we have a wide variety of persons. So at the first point, I'd really like to have each of the panel members sort of address from their perspective what they are doing at a national level in terms of the coordination between the different agencies. And maybe we will start with Bono at the end there, and then we'll work our way this way. So Bono, you as part of the Department of Health, maybe let's keep our comments to 3 to 5 minutes, not longer, so that we can each get a chance to interact. Thank you. Bono.
Thank you and good morning to everyone. Thank you for that question and all protocol observed. I think for us at National or the Ministry of Health, what we are doing in terms of collaboration, I am responsible or coordinating at a national level issues of climate change in the health department. So what we were able to do, we were able to establish a National Climate Change and Health Steering Committee in 2022, which is actually sitting on quarterly basis from that time. And that is a collaborative mechanism that we have. But besides that particular collaborative stakeholder, we have several other multi-stakeholder forums that actually we sit in terms of deliberations that look at either be it issues of disease surveillance, either be it issues of climate change, the one that I've indicated. We also look at cross-border collaborations. So it's a whole lot of multi-stakeholder collaborations. However, if we are to zoom into the ones that talk to the agenda for today, we also sit in a structure that sits in the National Disaster Management Committee, where health is presented. I know that South African Weather Services also sit there, and those are structures that actually guide in terms of what are the early warning, in terms of weather. We also have early warning in terms of disease surveillance. So we are able to collaborate in those structures. But above all, in terms of weather services, we have collaborations in terms of being able to receive early warnings, which then we actually cascade to our provinces and municipalities to ensure that they become ready to respond to the climate warnings that the weather warnings, that they have received. I think I will give some highlights as time goes on in terms of what then becomes the barriers in terms of us being able to respond as and when we have received such early warnings. But we are part and parcel of the systems that are available in the country in terms of the work of weather services. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll move to the next.
Thank you very much. Dr. Roelof. Good morning all. I'm Naidoo from the National Hydrological Services, and yeah, I guess the question proposed by Dr. Roelof is really to start more on the positive side of things. I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in the sector from a collaboration point of view. But just to start on the positives, currently I know the data landscape, it's quite complex, and it talks, and I think we can talk days really around our different roles and mandates. If you talk the South African Weather Service, and I know the example was given regarding the South African Weather Service in the Department of Water being the National Hydrological Services being separate, and that comes from legislation. So the mandates there at the national, at the legislative level are different. We have different laws that guide why we exist, but at the operational level, I think there's certainly an opportunity to address that. And the National Hydrological Service and the South African Weather Service have some good collaborations together. One example I can give is on rainfall data. We do have agreements between the National Hydrological Service, the Weather Service, and the Agricultural Research Council to share data. Another good example on the platform side is HydroMet, and I see Michelle here today. But that was a collaboration between the National Service and the Weather Service on a systems basis to solve water issues in South Africa at the various scales. So I think, yeah, just to set the scene, those are two examples of good collaborations, but I think a lot more needs to be done on the operational level in terms of data. I can give you one bad example because I know I started on the good side, but I remember putting a rain gauge, installing a rain gauge for the Department of Water next to a South African Weather Service rain gauge that was also next to an agricultural research rain gauge. And I still installed it because that was what we were told to do at the time. But we could have distributed that rain gauge quite nicely and have a good spatial coverage, but we didn't. And so the question is really, where does that mandate lie? I think, yes, at the legislative level, we have different mandates, but at an operational level, we can deal with these issues. So yeah, that's just, I like to just throw that out there just to set the tone for further questions. But yeah, I'll stop there for now, Dr. Roelof.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Aderito Aramuge from Mozambique. Well, it's the first time I checked the microphone, so I would like to say thank you to Baris and responded to all partners here for inviting me to this event. Governance mechanism. First, I would like to take you to the global level at the World Meteorological Organization, where hydro and meteorological operation are being responsible. If you see in the countries, the issues of agriculture are under Ministry of Agriculture. Issues of health under Ministry of Health. Issues of meteorology, that's very complicated. In my country, 3 months we were in transport. Now we are in Ministry of Communication. If you go to South Africa, I think it's environment. If you go to Brazil, it's defense. You go, so matters here in different ministry. We are talking about the structure. If you go inside the country, some Meteo and the hydro are in the same institution, in the same director. This is easy to manage. But in some countries like Mozambique, there are two different ministries. Minister of Communication, Med Service, Minister of Public Affairs is hydro. So that's why there's a need really to have a very good mechanism so that can be interaction between them. So what the government of Mozambique did is bring all together and decide to establish the rules. Who does what? For instance, I think most of us, we know about impact horizon forecast, which is the way to reduce the technical way to talk about how the weather will be in the day after. But This helped us as medicines to say what the weather will do tomorrow in terms of, instead of say 25 millimeters, which not all knows, to say, let's say the water will reach this stage. That's where the problem comes. If you made sense that you're doing forecast, the rain that will come from the upper to the land, and you start talking about inundation, then hydro comes say, no, this is not your business. After you put the water in land, now it's my time to monitor where will be the inundation. So we need to come up with very clear rules from each other. So we have went to establish legal and policy framework. Everything must be written so that no one could complain in the future. So we established a national disaster risk reduction management master plan where medicines and other institutions, they were incorporated there with their respective rule. We established a national climate change strategy so that we as medicines and disaster management and the Ministry of the Environment could have really a rules for each one. Is medicines doing climate? Is the medicines doing climate policy or research climate? So those issues are there. We came up also with the institutional coordination platform, which is a technical council where all the institutions, meteorology is multi-sectoral. So all the institutions that needs that information, we come together, we sit and we plan. For instance, when we made service bring the seasonal forecast, then we at the country, we invite all the institutions, we sit there and we show, this is the forecast for the next season. So you guys, road, electricity, health, agriculture, please do your diagnostic based on this information. So this is in a nutshell, the mechanism that the government of Mozambique came up in order to sort out the problem of integration and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Roelof. I see some very angry stares at us. I'm not sure whether that's to intimidate us to keep the answers a bit shorter. Maybe we should bring the coffee machine into the
Have a coffee just before.
I think I'm going to have another one. Good morning, everybody. I think from the National Disaster Management Center, we often get criticized because we say our legislation is good, but our institutionalization is bad, and our coordination is bad because we're working across various provinces that have different risk regimes, different risk profiles. So we've tried to improve this over the years. I think one of the things that's really had us in favor of managing this aspect is our coordination with the South African Weather Services. I think in other countries where you have various levels of hazard that's not predominantly weather related, you have a more varied mixture of coordination. So in South Africa, much of our hazards are caused by weather-related incidents, which helps us to coordinate better. So I think that we try and institutionalize the function through the provincials and the districts to an extent. But what we find working was that each province is able at a national level to take its own approach to managing their disasters. What we found in provinces like the Western Cape, a cluster approach works better, where they coordinate with the different entities. Obviously, there's a governance framework that underpins that, works very differently from a province like the Eastern Cape. So at the national level, we look to provide a 3-month forward early warning advisory, so a seasonal forecast almost, taking the South African Weather Service forward-looking outlook, merging that with the hazard profiles that we have at the NDMC and giving you an indication of what's going to happen. If you looked at the recent snow incident in the Eastern Cape, and you looked at what was predicted 3 months before from a national center, you found a very good spatial collaboration with what happened on the ground from a hazard perspective to what happened from a predictive perspective. So those are the kinds of models that we want to roll out at the national level that gives some kind of legs to an early warning system. We really struggle with early warnings at a local level because As you know, in the Eastern Cape disaster, many people did not get the warnings, although they were issued. So that last mile delivery of early warnings, whether it's through traditional mechanisms or smartphone delivery, which many people at the community level, deep rural areas don't have, those are the issues. So we really struggle with that. Although we specify at the national level what your response plan should be, a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, we find that because of the small scale impact of some of these disasters at the level of vulnerability on the ground, we are not able to harmonize and balance these response procedures. So it's a work in progress. At the national level, we do an advisory every quarter to advise on what's in store for the quarter. When we have an impending media statement from the weather services, we do a 3-day governance seating of the province and all its response agencies. But in the actual operation, we do a steering column that consists of the local job operations through the province. And we really have made strides in terms of managing the disaster. Some of the province obviously suffer from this thing of being impacted, being hurt quite a lot. The KZN in 2022 really felt the impact of the disasters, and that put in place various legislative instructions at a provincial level to give them some kind of acceleration towards improving the disaster management system. I think we can have more discussions as the questions come in. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. The other colleagues have said it all, so I don't know what to say. And this is a problem when you're the last speaker. So allow me to introduce myself. I'm Prithiviraj Booneeady. You can call me Raj. And I'm the acting director of the Meteorological Services, as well as the PR of Mauritius with the people. So coming to the theme, to me, we just take it from the international, which all of us are aware of, the international agreement, everything, all those protocols that we have signed, the WMO convention in 1947, and we just scale it down up to where we are currently with the Paris Agreement and so many things. So at national level, we try to implement these agreements once we have ratified and signed them, because we take a commitment to the international organization. So Mauritius, we are working quite closely with other agencies. Now, initially, Mauritius was the most important hazard was cyclones. We had certain protocols that we had established since a long time back. It was improved, but now as we see with development and infrastructure everywhere, concrete, so new hazards are coming. We call them emerging hazards. Firstly, because of the extreme events that we are observing, and secondly, about the infrastructure that has been built. So based on that, we have improved further. And initially, disaster management was within the Prime Minister's office, and it was mainly meteorology. But now there are several agencies involved, I would say. After the Sendai framework in 2015, we came up with certain regulations and laws that we have established. The disaster management law that was proclaimed in 2017. Then came the Meteorological Act in 2019 and the Climate Change Act 2020. So all these came up with certain lapse in time, and we were able to. This is the framework, by the way, the legal framework that institutionalize and give specific mandates to specific agencies on what they're going to do. For example, the Meteorological Services Act came up with certain regulations, and we have improved our warning system. Now we have moved from cyclone to heavy rain, heavy swells, storm surge, strong wind, you just name it, all those hazards. So we have several types of warnings that we issue at different levels. Now the problem that we are facing is currently what is the impact on ground and what is the accuracy of our forecast and timeliness. Timeliness matters to some extent, but what is more important for us to discuss currently, it is on the table, is the accuracy of our forecast. Because when we issue the third level of forecast, a warning level, where you have to stop certain activities, this is what matters. And accuracy is very important because we can't stop the economy, the private companies to go on working. So this is one of the major challenges that we are facing, and we are looking forward to improve our warning system, which is based on tier system and moving towards impact-based forecasting and integrating AI if possible. But this is also a big challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for going through that. I think I'm going to give one more round, and we're going to talk about two things: the regional and cross-border frameworks. And there we think especially of tropical cyclones. Clouds do not know borders, and heavy rain systems neither. And then also crisis governance models, because usually that happens during a crisis. One of the interesting things happening, if we just go back to the disasters over the past few years and loss of life, like in the KwaZulu-Natal floods, and even in the recent floods in Texas, warnings were done. But ultimately, because those are happening on extremely short timescales, having not access to real-time data is really an important component in terms of really being accurate in your warnings. General warnings can be accurate maybe a day in advance, but now with coupled atmospheric and hydrology models, you can run these models every hour, and basically, because ultimately it's inundation that's killing people, that's destroying infrastructure. It's not the rain necessarily, but it's the inundation that comes with that. Even in Texas, the same happened. The warnings were done, and even at short time, but there, the last mile communication to the local people in the area was not timely. So this goes back to what was mentioned in terms of timely doing these things. Another aspect that is important that the delegate from Mauritius mentioned here is what is happening in climate change. It's interesting that he mentioned that there's new hazards like flooding, local flooding occurring. There's studies actually in the Caribbean at the moment, although the Caribbean was always hit by hurricanes, but that thunderstorm activity is increasing, and especially over the last year we've seen it, and all the flash floods are occurring because of thunderstorms. So in these changing environments, forecasting thunderstorms become much more complicated than forecasting hurricanes, because hurricanes are big meteorological systems, but knowing exactly the time and location of a heavy thunderstorm, of heavy rainfall, is more difficult. Although on the other hand, now we have technologies with radar and assimilating radar data into numerical models, we can do short-term forecasting, 2 hours or 3 hours, up to 4 hours now. So it's these kind of disasters that, to a large extent, kill people, but also destroy disaster. And I think one of our primary efforts with early warning systems is to save lives. But these things happen suddenly, and really in that crisis management, how do we work together? Do we get real-time data so that we can put it into our hydrology models? Can we real-time forecast inundation, even if we can do it 2 hours in advance? So those are challenges I think we have from the meteorological, the hydrological community. This also affects water quality and other things. So I think I'd like to ask the panel members to take those two things together, because I think we need official frameworks. And what the delegate from Mauritius also said, that they have been putting agreements in place. We're doing the same in the Caribbean. Also, WMO as a regional aspect is doing a lot of things, and they have several initiatives like the Sendai framework, cruise. There are several initiatives, and how do we feed into those things? But how can we feed it into a national level to the local level, where basically the vulnerability is, and where people get killed and infrastructure is destroyed. And I'm going to start from this side now, because the last speaker said he didn't have much to say anymore, but he did have something to say. And then I will go away to the other side.
So thank you very much. In fact, I'll be very specific to take a case for Mauritius. So we have multi-agency approach where we have a council, which we call the National Disaster Risk Management Council, that sits every 2 months or 3 months to take stock of what is being done. And if ever there is a crisis, for instance, the flood, which is our big concern, being a small island, we have very much specific microclimate in the various regions around the island. And we are much more worried about those forecasting, those heavy rain. And we do have a radar, an S-band radar, which is operational since September 2019. And it is one of the major tools that we have to do nowcasting, as you say, 2 hours or 3 hours earlier. But for us to issue this heavy rain warning, we have a time lapse from 30 minutes to 6 hours. Why? Because due to sea breeze effect, which most of you know, we do get very strong rainfall that happens in a very short lapse of time. So this high intensity, short duration rainfall are becoming more frequent, and we should be able to forecast and inform the disaster management authority. At the same time, the National Crisis Committee comes into play, and it consists of maybe 3 or 4 people together with very short communication. It should be within minutes that we take decisions for evacuation, and it is headed by the Prime Minister Office. So this is how we operate, and this is where the challenge comes into play, because in such situation we have either to close down the schools or close down businesses or even public service. So sometimes what happens, as you know, being a small island state, so those clouds that we were expecting, this is the uncertainty part that we have to work very importantly. So when there is a huge mark of big cloud approaching Mauritius, but unfortunately you see that the rainfall that we were expecting, it just falls 5 kilometers away into the sea. So it misses the island. So this is where the problem comes. And then people start to shout, what is the problem? Where's the precision? Where is the accuracy of the forecast? You stop businesses, you stop schools and so many things, and yet it's a fine weather, sunny everywhere. So this is the big challenge that we have to work and try to incorporate our knowledge through maybe new technologies that we wish or we look forward to work with all those minds together here, and then to find solutions, especially for small island states where it has got its own microclimate and specificities on its requirements. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think maybe just at a very high level, if we're looking at what happened in South Africa to the COVID pandemic, we set up a national council and command. So in our crisis management sort of model from a disaster management perspective, we're either dealing with a national sort of level of command depending on the severity of the incident. But for the local disasters or the local coordination of high impact sort of climate-induced warnings, there's 3 levels that sit. So normally it's just an advisory at the provincial and the district local level. That's mainly just to get the contingency plans up. What is the province doing? Do they need additional help from any other arm of government or any sector department? But you'll notice that in the course of the recent sort of high impact warnings in South Africa, we have 3 levels that sit in one day. So we've recently brought on the Interministerial Committee, which is a delegation of ministers responsible for their portfolios. So after the advisory sits in the morning, we have a DG's Governance Steering Committee almost in midday, and in the evening, maybe after 8, it's the Ministerial Committee that sits either 3 days before we can actually have a high level warning, and sitting throughout the course of the weeks in which that happens. So that really gives us a full circle of governance, sort of accountability in all those levels. And from experience, when we started the interministerial meeting, we had to really make the political level understand what the technical aspects of the warnings was, how the levels will operate, what the contingency plans are, what would the provinces do. So I'm happy to say that you know, although many disasters have impacted South Africa, these structures have started to sort of mature and get balanced out in terms of the operation. So we really have clear guidelines now from the interministerial committee that happens very late in the night that actually takes action on the ground the next morning. So TRUs, deployment, additional funds, and that's the kind of activation that you want to have when you're dealing with various multi-level high-impact hazards across the country. But in the local institutionalization of disaster management practice in the provinces and the districts, you know, we've taken the 10 levels of impact-based warning in the country, and we've aligned them to early response procedures at a district level that involve the local municipalities. Now the local and the district levels begin to own what the warnings are and what the early responses would be. So no two districts will have the same early response mechanism, but what we get out of the exercise is when would you coordinate your provincial or your district level job? Is it at a level 4 or a level 5? And then we hold those districts to those kinds of operations in a 3-day warning, for example. So 3 days before we can have an Eastern Cape sort of impact, the local job is sitting, which makes mitigation on the ground from a response perspective really easier than when we have to be very reactive about the response from the national center. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Mozambique is one of the most vulnerable countries. If you see 9 of the main rivers in SADC cross Mozambique going to the Indian Ocean from west to east. We have a tropical cyclone crossing from east to west. We have the intertropical conversion zone crossing from north to south. And in the south, we have cold fronts going to south to north. So we are in the middle of bullets of extreme events. So we need, or the government need really to be aware of that. Maybe because of that, the president of Mozambique was awarded a position of African champion on disaster management. The recent one is also African champion in disaster management. We know that disaster is not just distributing food after the event. Disaster starts with prevention. Prevention starts with early warning. When we talk about early warning, is hydromet information that's necessary to trigger the early action, which are the disaster management and the humanitarian institution. Because of that, we first pay attention on the regional policy. At the SADC level, we do have what we call SADC protocol on transport and meteorology. And all that the government decided to behave in terms of meteorology is there. So we established our policies, taking consideration this protocol because of the share of the information. When was Idai happened, we had more than 600 deaths and the destruction about 3 USD billion. But then we opened the eyes the same way when there was tsunami 2004 Sumatra, where that was a wake up of all the governments to deal with the tsunami. Idai also was for Mozambique. So we started really investing in hydrometeorology, and we saw when it was the time of Freddy. Freddy, as all we know, was the tropical cyclone that was in Guinness Book more than 30 days since it was formed. It hit twice Mozambique, but even though we didn't have such loss of lives, I think one life is a life, of course, but we have reduced a lot from more than 600 to only less than 100. Even the impact, financial impact was less than a million. So this was a result of the implementation or the commitment of the government when it comes for hydrometeorological investment. Because of that, the president of Mozambique we came up with a program that we still follow, which is called One District, One Meteorological Station. The objective is to have in 154 districts at least one meteorological station. The more we have, the better. But this is I'll say, the principal, the main that we want at this level. Of course, if we have, now I'm talking about sharing data, if we have, let's say, at our regional
Does the mic have a timer?
Batteries.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the issue of data sharing, if let's say we had a network of meteorological infrastructures in the SADC where we could share data. Sometimes also, maybe because of what I had said, that we are in different ministries. We agreed in one issue, but when it comes from implementation, then we find that no, we do have a certain policy that does not allow what we have decided and what we have decided. So somehow these reduce the speed of implementation of those activities at the time we are saying that the climate change is present and we need to bring resilience to the people. We cannot move Mozambique from Indian Ocean to Atlantic to avoid the tropical cyclone, but we must learn to live with those events without being affected. This is called resilience. So to go to resilience, we need to go through all these steps from L1 to any action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the PR Mozambique, and I think he's touched on quite an interesting policy, which I think is the SADC protocol and shared water courses. But before we get to shared water courses, just to bring out a certain reference, which is in South Africa, we have what is called the National Framework for Climate Services. And it comes from the Global Framework for Climate Services from WMO. So countries generally, they look at the global framework and then they downscale it at a national level. And we've done that. And I think to a large extent, many countries have done that. So the frameworks are there, but how do we break the silos? The silos in practice still exist. And when I just hear the different conversations between the National Disaster Management, the Weather Service, the Hydrological Services, there has to be some level of centralization first of the data before you develop some level of system so that you can have a complete picture of what's going on. And I do get it, it's sometimes country specific. I think there's talk here from Mauritius. If you look at the case of Mauritius, the WMO guidelines on network density, I don't even think caters for an island state. They can't even apply the guideline to Mauritius. So radar becomes important there. In the case of South Africa, Mozambique being our close neighbor, we're going to have a good regional framework in place. And to some extent, the legislation is there. We work well with Mozambique in terms of the hydrological services side, particularly on the Limpopo Basin, on the flood early warning system. I think, like the PR of Mozambique has mentioned, Mozambique is in a very vulnerable location. So they sometimes can get high flows from the South African side with contributions to the rivers from Botswana, from Zimbabwe and South Africa. So they need an early warning system, which they do have in place, which is largely driven through river basin organizations like LIMCOM. We have also another river basin organization called Orasicom, which deals with the Orange SenQ. So there's a lot going on, but it's fragmented. Whether is it on the policy side or is it on the operational side, but the landscape needs to be sorted out to some extent. If we talk regionally, I think that's quite crucial, especially when we have big flooding. I think 2000 was quite huge flooding in the Limpopo Basin, and Mozambique would have been the beneficiary of some of those high flows. So we've got to have the systems in place, whether it's systems, it's data. We've got to sort out the landscape. It's definitely not sorted out yet. It's still siloed. So yeah, that's just one of the points. But I like the topic of flood early warning, and I think WMO is pushing the agenda around early warnings for all. Flooding is a big issue. I think Texas in USA had big flooding recently, so no one is exempt from it. And it's this hydromet sector that needs to provide the foundation for it, supported by policy. But yeah, it's an interesting space, and I know we never touched really on funding, and that's quite a big issue around observation networks. And I hope that maybe at some platform we'll get a chance to talk funding, because funding is quite a big one in setting up the instrumentation, setting up the data, so that the relevant system can provide reliable information. Just want to point one example, especially in South Africa. We're very reliant on the source impact-based forecasting system, and I think that feeds a lot of what the decision making is around disaster management, especially at the district level. But if you look at the hydrological services level, look at big, large-scale infrastructure like dams. Then you've got the Valorant system, which is gated, and that's man-made operational releases. The impact-based forecasting system provides an overview of what the rainfall is going to be there, but the operations also have an impact on disaster. So that collaboration has to happen at the various scales, depending on the actual site at hand. So I just think that from the hydrological services perspective, there's definitely more we can do with our weather service, with the disaster management, to strengthen those systems. But yeah, it's fragmented, and we do have projects that are up and coming. I know one is now the Protea project, which is being incepted. It's a project between South Africa and the Dutch government to develop a lot of these systems. And the conversations we're having is still talking centralization of data. It's all over the place, and it's something that we need to get a grip on. And just from a global scale, if I just go regional global, I think global scale there's a bit more organization. And that's coming from the fact that WMO drives these big initiatives for harmonization of data across the landscape. But I think we need to bring it into the regional scale. And then how we do that, I think, is still up for discussion. But yeah, I will stop there. I know I talk a lot. And one more thing. I don't know if anybody watches rugby. There might be some English supporters here today. I know they came a long way. But yeah, just thanks to the vision for setting up this. I think they break silos in the sector, whether at the policy level or at the operational level and at the data level. But yeah, there's a nice slogan from our rugby team. We won the World Cup quite a lot of times. And what the slogan is, and I think it could be trademarked. It's stronger together. So I think we should adopt it in the sector. Stronger together, we can resolve a lot of issues. But yeah, I'll stop there on the rugby.
Thank you. I think I will start by saying all hands on deck, together we can do more. However, looking at, thanks Dr. Roelof for that question, I think what we need to look at is what our Mozambique colleague has indicated is that once we have early warnings, it needs to assist us or guide us with early interventions. And looking at where we are as a sector also from South Africa, most of the time we are reactive. And I think it talks to many sectors, not only health, that we react. And I will borrow from the words that Dr. Roelof said. He said, clouds knows no borders. And as health, we say disease knows no borders. So if we do not become proactive, we are always caught off guard. And it makes us to be so much confused in terms of how do we then respond to those natural disasters, if one can put it like that. As a sector, we have actually learned a lot, not only from the experiences or lessons from COVID response. We have also learned from a whole lot of other climate variables. We had cholera, which was affecting Zimbabwe and I think also Mozambique and a bit of South Africa, the Bobo area. And that actually from the cross-border collaboration, we are very strong on that. Because we've got cross-border collaborations, engagements, especially on disease surveillance, and that assisted in terms of responding. However, if we look at other climate variables, we experienced, I think it was in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, in the Northern Cape, 5 farm workers who actually died because of exposure to extreme heat. And as a sector, by that time as a country, we had developed a guideline on responding to extreme heat, which is called Heat Health Action Guidelines. I think I'll present later in the afternoon on that. However, when we had that, the other issue, I think Dr. Roelof and colleagues, is that we have been, I think, people who actually assess in terms of performance of countries in terms of legislation into implementation. South Africa has got beautiful legislation, but implementation becomes another story. And we found ourselves that we have the legislation, but implementation is a challenge. So what we have been doing is that we are capacitating our stakeholders. As we were capacitating and implementing, then 2024, we had people who passed on as a result of hypothermia. And there was a question that was raised in one of the Chance Network, the first engagement that we had in the country, here in South Africa. And the question was, South Africa, you've got the Heat Health Action Guidelines. Are you also looking at issues of extreme cold? And our response was that we don't have a challenge of that. And last year came, it was a crisis, people died, they don't know how to respond to issues of cold. So we are now moving into that. But we all know that policy development happens like that. You need to first experience something so that you can be able to develop a policy, because you will have been taught the challenges that are associated with you not having a strategy to respond to that. However, I think our other best learning was the KZN floods. And with that, the collaborations that happened as a way of responding to the floods, where we lost more than 400 people. KZN this year, they did not experience that massive challenge because already they have learned and they are able to implement. However, Eastern Cape province experienced the worst. And from health perspective, one of the colleagues actually reached out to us to say, please, can you come and capacitate us? Because we are able to see that KZN has responded well. They only had 2 fatalities. And it was not as a result of, the climate variable, but it was a power surge. But now, when you look at Eastern Cape, I think on the 3rd of July, this is the stats that I have, we were sitting at 102 deaths. So they need to be able to say, can't they benchmark with the response that KZN did to ensure that communities get to be protected from all these climate change impacts. As I'm closing, I also want to say, if we look at the early warnings from weather services, we were fortunate enough as a country and as a ministry to be part of the GIPS and UP program that talks to malaria leadership program, where it's your 8 SADC countries that have got a challenge of malaria diseases, including Mozambique. And in that, what we were able to also look at, or the lessons out of it, is that you find that Mozambique will do their spraying for the vector in October, depending on their early warnings. And then South Africa is doing in December. So when we were discussing that, we said, are we even looking at issues of elimination? Because then it means that the vector can then be able to move from one area to the other. But if we are spraying at the same time, then it means we are definitely dealing with the vector itself. So issues of cross-border collaborations are very key issues of early warning and sharing of information into those particular platforms. There is a lot of learnings that we can be able to do to sort of correct the challenges that we are actually seeing and reduce the burden of diseases. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the panel members. I think very instructive and very good comments that we have someone. I just wanted to follow up lastly before I give it to the audience to get some questions to our panel members also. I think two things that was mentioned also by the last speaker at the moment is, we need to move from proactive to from reactive to proactive. Yes, we can do early warnings, but what happens to those early warnings and how accurate are those early warnings for this specific location? And then also adaptiveness, and how do we provide meteorological services? How do we provide hydrological services? Can we predict the inundation level and the flooding level of the rivers, even if we could do that 2 hours, 3 hours in advance? Adaptiveness. One example, we have a project in the Bahamas. 90% of the Bahamas is below 10 feet above sea level. We are doing all the NWP, all the forecaster station, all the applications modeling in the cloud, not in local infrastructure on the islands. Because especially when a disaster happens, some of your infrastructure can be damaged. And how can we do that? And especially in the last 10 years, the cloud has developed tremendously. And I would invite you to learn more about that, because even in Africa now, there are about 8-9 countries where the cloud has been implemented already. Here also, where we can do NWP and so on. And then also knowing our risks. If our risks in a certain area is like a thunderstorm flooding, how do we forecast thunderstorms? We need to go down to 1 kilometer resolution. Yes, with radar, we can do extrapolation for 2 hours. But what is happening in the developing world at the moment, we blend the high resolution models with radar, and we can now accurately predict out to 6 hours in advance in a local type of environment. So technologies are developing extremely fast, and the computing becomes less and less expensive, even in the cloud. So I think all this adaptiveness and proactiveness has to happen at several levels, at the meteorological level, at the hydrological level, at the health level. We did a project with Google where we predicted meningitis in West Africa so that they could relocate vaccines in advance of where the outbreak occurs. So there are many things that we can work together in terms of this disaster things. And I really appreciate what all the comments was. And then also data sharing is one of the most important parts. If you don't have the more data and the better you can predict, both from every aspect, and then working together at multi levels, even in terms of our NWP type of things. So at this point, just summarizing that, I want to give the chance for the audience. If there are any questions for our panel members from the audience, please go ahead. Anybody has a question? Just one minute.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much to the panel. Some interesting insights. My name is Jared Massa. Maybe just a question on whether there's a case study, Jeremy, of where budget planning and alignment, whether there are opportunities to do that in any year. Not everyone, because of the mandates, sits in different parts, but at an administrative level, whether you've afforded yourselves the opportunities to sit and plan together in different departments so that you have at least an aligned budget process, but you also have aligned funding. Because without funding, I mean, it just becomes talk shops. That's at a sort of government departmental level. The second question, I think, is about the regional alignment. Has anyone taken advantage of the African free trade regime? I know it's new, it's only a couple of years old. But again, talking to finance, acquisition of technologies, etc., at scale. Because that's the benefit of having, and we see those benefits in Europe with the coordination that happens in Europe, the sharing of the monies, it's borderless. Have we taken advantage of that? Or have we got any steps towards taking advantage of that to do things at scale and drive up volume, excuse me, to ameliorate some of the points that you raised?
Thank you very much. I think two very good questions. Maybe the first question I'll ask some of the alignment of the budget process. Although we are aligned in terms of how we operate, but can we align the budget process? Who from the panel would like to comment on this?
Thank you very much, Jerry, and for the question. I think I'll try to say about budget planning and alignment. So the government of Mauritius has got a process that prior to budget, they have this consultation that goes about 2 months to 3 months before. So all these stakeholders come and present the case, and this is taken by the Ministry of Finance, what amount of budget that will be allocated to sector specific. For instance, meteorology is very low. So we get very little funding. So another thing is about the early warning for all initiative. And we know that we had a national workshop to take into consideration a plan, which we're going to develop a national plan. This is where all the stakeholders came in, be it from the meteorology, disaster management, the communication, the IT representative, the Ministry of Information Technology, as well as the response from Bono, which is a Red Cross Society. So they have been tasked to prepare this kind of plan that we are going to hopefully submit very soon. Thank you.
Yeah, just maybe from the disaster management perspective on the budget planning and alignment, I think just on the early warnings for all initiative, it's the first time that we've seen all 4 pillars starting to align budgets in terms of the medium-term work that we're going to do. And also for South Africa, our roadmap looks like it's going to go beyond the medium term because there's far-fetched sort of goals in the different pillars that require budget allocation that's not going to happen now, but in the next sort of planning phase. So it's the first time in South Africa that we've seen budget alignment across all 4 pillars. So with the Red Cross, with the Department of Digital and Communications, with the South African Weather Services, with the disaster management entity. So budget in 2 phases, budget for the work that we want to do now across the 4 pillars, and budget in the second phase, which is the longer term. It makes the budgetary process a little bit more sustainable, and it commits these different organizations to putting the budget aside to make those pillar actions happen. And just on a high level, in terms of the roadmap, we'll be launching that in the G20 meeting, in the ministerial meeting that's going to be happening in Cape Town. So we're busy working on that for South Africa across all 4 pillars. I have to tell you that it's not an easy task. We were told at the last G20 that we'll be the first G20 country to have a national roadmap. So I'm looking at SOARS and Red Cross to make that happen for South Africa. And in terms of the regional alignment, we were a little bit late to get into the cooperation at a SADC level for the. Mike's definitely at a time. Voting timers, that's good. So at the regional level, we are still finalizing our commitment to the SADC response for disaster management. and making sure that our national treasury can commit to that on a yearly basis. We do fund SADC through the country sort of treasury platform, but the shock requires additional funding. So it's something that we're going to be working with, but on a more country-to-country level basis. I mean, Reunion Islands and South Africa are also looking at something that we can do on tropical storms with Mozambique and the other countries. So our current focus is the early warnings for all, because it's a roadmap that requires us to finalize now, but it's something that we can look at from the SADC perspective over the long term.
Thank you. Well, from the experience of Mozambique, we do have two main documents. One is called the contingency plan, which annual we produce after the rain season or seasonal forecast being issued, where we all sit together and align what we need in different sectors so that we can accomplish with with the activities needed for that seasonal forecast. This is annual. However, another alignment that we did now, it's the same like Mauritius, which is a national roadmap on early warning system, where for the 4 pillars, the 4 different institutions plus other partners, we came up with aligning the national roadmap impact, financial impact that we have got, and we are knocking now the doors to see who can fund this national roadmap. A part of that, of course, is the normal budget that Hydro Service is doing at own ministry, and the Meteorological is doing also at its own ministry. But we come together when it comes for the contingency plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Just maybe a comment on the budget. Budget is always never enough. But yeah, to cut a long story short, the answer from a hydrological services perspective in terms of hydro instruments, certainly no. It depends on the variable. Within the Department of Water, we're probably the only ones measuring water levels on rivers at the scale that we do. So you wouldn't expect us to engage with the Met Service per se to discuss alignment of budgets. Another big issue is where the national service sits. You look at the National Hydrological Service, it sits within the broader water department. And so now you're competing for budget with even internally in your own budget. You'll find there's a lot of budget perhaps allocated for the building of a new dam or a wastewater treatment plant. And that's millions of rands and in fact millions of US dollars. But the hydromet systems get a much smaller allocation of budget. So internally within the department, it is a challenge. I think it's not so much so on instruments, but a big challenge is on travel. Going to remote stations and capacity, human resource capacity to employ people to administer the service, and it's all very much linked to budget. But another interesting thing that I see that's emerging is that governments are now looking beyond just the national treasury for funding to support networks. They're looking at donor funds. I'm sure most would be aware of the Green Climate Fund proposal around the next phase of this, what was called the SADC HICOS project. So a proposal was submitted to the GCF looking at alternate sources. The other thing is, if you're a full state organization, it's difficult to get loans compared to maybe a state-owned entity. Because of the governance systems there, the funding mechanisms they are different. We rely on the treasury. It's very difficult to bring money into a state department. We did get funds recently from WMO to do some capacity development work, but it's very small scale. And yeah, if you want to implement large scale hydrological or hydromet systems, where's the money going to come from? Apart from just the water department, there's bigger politics at play. You're competing with other departments like health, like education, like other sectors. So where does the government invest that money? Should they do hydromet or other resources? But so, yeah, we definitely need a better model to try and finance these systems, and the sustainability of the monitoring network. Certainly, it's going to rely on many different streams of getting money in. So yeah, that's the short answer was no for that. But they're just adding a bit more meat to what we see. From the hydro service, we look to see where we can capitalize on projects to strengthen their networks. So indirectly, another example is just so like water affairs or hydrological service very reliant on rain data from the South African Weather Service, and they're obviously an entity. So we sometimes buy data from them based on their data policy. We respect their data policy. So that's one way of us getting money into the weather service, buy the data. But yeah, surely there's a better way to do it. But yeah, that's just comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think our story is similar to what he has just indicated. We are all aware that with the withdrawal of PEPFAR funding by USA, it has affected health in a very serious way. Our programs, especially on HIV and AIDS, were affected dismally. We have people who have, besides people losing employment, we also have a lot of, loss in terms of services that were rendered in our health facilities that talks to HIV programs. So if we have looked at the budget vote, most of our funding for this current financial year is going into addressing the issues of HIV and AIDS. And these are some of the priority programs within health currently in South Africa, including national health insurance. So you can just imagine the program on climate change. Actually, we have been told that the mandate lies with Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. So we don't have any budget associated with that. But in terms of response to other challenges, we can be able to leverage funding from other programs within the ministry itself, and also from NDMC if things are very serious. We are looking at programs that we have that are talking to Pandemic Preparedness Fund. Those maybe who attended the G20, the working group 4 that recently happened was actually focusing on that. So that is another area for us to leverage funds that can be able to assist us in this particular work, because Pandemic Preparedness Fund is looking at early warnings. So we will be able to address also some of the issues there. We are also considering applications through the Green Climate Fund. We have several stakeholders that we are working with, be it from research institutions or academic institutions, and also civil society, who are actually applying to do several projects that will benefit the sector. And those will, as they are applying, we are benefiting as a sector in terms of the results that will, one is, we've got, I think, some of the research, we will highlight them in the afternoon presentation in terms of what are those research that have been done, issues of responding to heat, what is actually happening to pregnant women and heat and so forth. So it's several institutions that are actually conducting such. Some we have just given them an endorsement letter as a sector to apply through the GCF. So I think we still need money. Unfortunately, it depends on prioritization and whether the funding is available to be able to do such type of work. And one last thing just to comment to say, we are completing the global survey for World Health Organization on climate change and health. And I think what we've picked up, they want also issues of financial resources. And I was so embarrassed as I'm completing to say, as a sector, we are completing that we do not have. It's embarrassing because South Africa is also considered as one of the countries where things are happening. So if, yes, you've got policies, but you don't have funds to implement those strategies that you have put, what does it mean? Are we still relying on donors? Have we learned something from the USA issue currently with all the withdrawal? Are we still continuing looking at being funded by donors, whereas we know if they decide to withdraw, then it means services stop? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Although I do think, like what Jerry was saying, aligning budgets, because even if you go out for funding to the World Bank, so to some of the other big funding agencies, and even NGOs like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and other type of foundations that are funding, if you align together you are stronger. I'm going back to the rugby type of thing, because if people know these people are working together and they are integrated together, it's also a good thing to do it like that, and then getting the funding for that, instead of individually trying to work for your own institution and just making your own institution better and leaving the others maybe behind or not behind. But those are important parts. To some extent, our time is coming to an end here. And maybe for a 1-minute summary of each of the panel members, I'd just like to have them give a 1-minute summary of their ideas. And we'll start again this side, then move the microphone to the other side. Just 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I think what is important is the institutional mandates has to be clearly defined, and the roles and responsibilities have to be defined, SOPs defined, so that we know exactly who is doing what and do it together, as our friend said. If we move together, we are stronger. And another thing is what is alignment with the regional institutions. To me, it is important that the regional institutions that are coming up now, or a few years earlier, should follow the national mandates. Because I take an example, I was working for the SADC, and we were issuing certain kind of alerts for cyclones and other important alerts, high impact alerts. Then there was a committee of directors where we are instructed that this is not our mandate to issue warnings. So we have to be very, very careful if we are moving from national to regional. Mandates have to be clearly defined, and the regional mandate, regional agencies mandate have to follow the national ones. It is important, or else it won't work. Thank you very much.
Yes, just from the disaster management, I think yes, stronger together, something that we'll also have to sort of adopt going forward. What we see clearly is the impact of disasters on communities. So we have high levels of vulnerability, but we also see high impact from smaller scale weather systems across the country. And places like informal settlements have become very permanent structures in the landscape of South Africa. So our vulnerability is going to be poised to increase in the different provinces. But there's also promise at the end of the tunnel, or more light at the end of the tunnel, when we look at the early warnings for all roadmap. You know, it's the first time that all these sectors, the different pillars have been working together. We are working together much more now with other entities. Whereas previously we just said, well, we have the best disaster management legislation. We don't care whether it's embedded or institutionalized. We'll just push it through. And that hasn't yielded very good results. So collaboration, institutionalization, making sure that we embed the legislation to bring operational efficiency across the country is what we plan to do. Thanks.
They say that a person who cannot excuse because of arriving late at the office due to weather forecast is a meteorologist. He's the one who knows what time the rain will start. Why didn't you leave earlier to arrive? But hydrologist, he can even say, I was not told by the meteorologist. That's why I'm here. Despite of that, both, they play a very good role on early warning. That's why there is a need of having a very good established government structure in the country so that those two can work together and bring the result. As I said, at the end of the day, what do we want? Bring up resilience. That's all. But to reach that point, there's a lot of issues to be done. Develop terms of reference, plus what my two colleagues here have said, ensure resource mobilization according to the question that was raised there. So all those are the issues that the government must put in place so that can be committed in order to bring up resilience to the communities. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I don't think I can beat anything that's already been said here today. I think they touched on one crucial way forward, really. Break the silos. Break the silos. I know sometimes we sit in our immediate environments and we get a nice invite from the WMO to come to Geneva, and then we keep it to ourselves. We don't collaborate with anyone. We want to travel there and make our impact in our silo environment. Let's break that. Let's take the meteorologists and the hydrologists and the disaster management to Geneva together, and we caucus there, and we get resources. We work together and we solve the issue locally, really. So yeah, I just want to end on that note. Yeah, break the silos. Thank you.
Thank you. I think mine is on all hands on deck. Together we can do more. However, we also need to, I think from my colleague from disaster, I have raised it in a platform where you were sitting, that it's very key that we understand our roles and responsibilities, because you receive an early warning, and if you don't know what to do about it, it will not serve a purpose. You will not save lives. We have a lot of warnings that we are receiving, and I think from source, a colleague from source, we appreciate because they're coming with warnings also on TV, and it actually guides even just a community member to say these are the challenges that you will experience. But what then comes after that? What does that community member need to do? It's something that is not so much clear. But if it was clear to say who then needs to be able to operationalize that particular message, if let's say I'm receiving a warning here, there's going to be floods, what does it mean? Where do I go? Yes, I've received it. Where should I go? Which is the area that has been reserved for communities to be able to go and gather there, so that when floods start, yes, it will affect infrastructure, but it will not affect human lives. So we really need to strengthen those collaboration and clarify who needs to do what from the three spheres of government up until implementation. Oupa district, they've got a WhatsApp group for community members. When warnings were actually highlighted, they were then able to move to an area that is uphill, but that was the community that did it. So as government, we still need to do a lot more. So I'm leaving it also to say NDMC in your platforms, source in your platforms, let's find who needs to do that amongst the government structures. If we need to be able to bring in COPTA, let it be, because they're the ones who are on the implementation level. Thank you.
I want to thank the panel members. This was a great discussion. I'm sure there are more questions. Please feel free during the coffee time to interact with each other. But I think we want to give a special hand to our panel members.